guys, just a reminder, this video is being shared with permission from Scholastic, and it will be taken down in the beginning of June. We're going to start off with our riddle of the day. The riddle of the day from yesterday was, what is made of water but will die if you put it in water? The answer is an ice cube. The riddle of the day for today is, I'm tall when I'm young and I'm short when I'm old. What am I? I'm going to leave that there for you guys to think about. As you're thinking, I'm going to read our next two chapters. We're reading chapters 37 and 38. Chapter 37 is called Amazing. Hands grasped Tally's shoulders in the darkness. You made it. It was David's voice. In her surprise, Tally couldn't speak, but pulled him close, burying her face in his chest. Who else is with you? She shook her head. Oh, David whispered. Then his grip tightened as the cave shuddered around them. The roar of a hover car slowly passed overhead, and Tally imagined the specials machines searching every crevice in the rock for signs of their prey. Had she led them to David? That would be perfect, her final betrayal. The low rumble of pursuit passed over them again, and David pulled her deeper into the blackness, down a long, twisting path that grew colder and darker. A stillness settled around her, damp and chill, and Tally imagined again the trainload of dead Rusties buried under the stones. They waited in silence for what seemed like hours, holding each other, not daring to speak, until long after the sounds of the cars had faded. Finally, David whispered, What's happening back at the smoke? The specials came this morning. I know, I saw. He held her tighter. I couldn't sleep, so I took my board up the mountain to watch the sunrise. They went right over me, 20 hover cars at once, coming across the ridge. But what's happening now? They put everyone in the rabbit pen, separating us into groups. Croy said they were going to take us all back to our cities. Croy, who else did you see? Shay, a couple of her friends. The boss might have made it out. He and I made a break together. What about my parents? I don't know. She was glad for the darkness. The fear in David's voice was painful enough. His parents had founded the smoke and knew the secret of the operation. Whatever punishment awaited the other Smokies, it would be 100 times worse for them. I can't believe it finally happened, he said softly. Tally tried to think of something comforting to say. All she could see in the darkness was Dr. Cable's mocking smile. How did you get away? He asked. She pulled her hands to free her wrists, where the plastic bracelets of cuffs remained. I cut through these, got up on the board of the trading post, and stole Croy's hoverboard. With specials guarding you? She bit her lip, saying nothing. That's amazing. My mother says they're superhuman. Their second operation augments all their muscles and rewires their nervous system. And they're so scary looking. A lot of people just panic the first time they see one. He held her tighter, but I should have known that you would escape. Tally closed her eyes, which made no difference in the utter darkness. She wished they could stay in there forever, never having to face what was outside. It was just good luck. Tally was amazed that she was already lying again. If she had only told the truth about herself in the first place, then the Smokies would have known what to do about the pendant. They could have attached it to some migratory bird, and Dr. Cable would have been on her way to South America, instead of in the library overseeing the destruction of the smoke. But Tally knew she couldn't tell the truth. Not now. David would never trust her again, not after she'd destroyed his home, his family. She'd already lost Paris, Shay, and her new home. She couldn't bear to lose David as well. And what good would a confession do now? David would be left alone, and so would she, when they most needed each other. His hands ran across her face. You still amaze me, Tally. She felt herself shudder, the words twisting in her like a knife. In that moment, Tally made a deal with herself. Eventually, she would tell David what she had unwittingly done. Not now, but some day. When she'd made things better, fixed part of what she had destroyed, maybe then he would understand. We'll go after them, she said. Rescue them. Who? My parents? They came from my city, right? And that's where they'll take them. And Shay and Croy, too. We'll rescue them all. David laughed bitterly. Us two against a bunch of specials? They won't expect us. But how will we find them? I've never been inside a city, but I hear they're pretty big. More like 1 million people. Tally took a slow breath, once again remembering her first trip out to Dr. Cable's office. The low, dirt-colored buildings at the edge of the city, past the greenbelt and among the factories. The huge, misshapen hill nearby. I know where they'll be. You what? David pulled away from their embrace. I've been there. Special Circumstances Headquarters. There was a moment of silence. I thought they were secret. Most of the kids who come out here don't even believe in them. She went on, quite horrified that another lie was coming into her head with such ease. A while ago I pulled a really bad trick. the kind that gets you special attention. She rested her head against David again, glad she couldn't see his trusting expression. I snuck into New Pretty Town. That's the place where you live right after the operation, having fun all the time. I've heard of it, and uglies aren't allowed in, right? Yeah, it's a pretty serious trick. Anyway, I wore this mask and I crashed a party, and they almost caught me, so I grabbed a bungee jacket, which is like a hoverboard, but you wear it. It was invented for escaping tall buildings and a fire, but new pretties use it mostly for goofing around. So I grabbed one, pulled a fire alarm, and jumped off the roof. It freaked out a lot of people. Right, Shay told me the whole story on our way to the smoke, saying you were the coolest ugly in the world, he said, but all I was thinking was that things would be really boring in the city. Yeah, I guess so. But you got caught? Shay didn't mention that. The lie took form as she spoke, pulling on as many strands of truth as it could reach. Yeah, I thought I'd gotten away with it, but they found my DNA or something. A few days later, they took me to special circumstances, introduced me to the scary woman. I think she was in charge there. It was the first time I'd ever seen specials. Are they really that bad up close? She nodded in the dark. They're beautiful, absolutely, but in a cruel, horrible way. The first time's the worst. They only wanted to scare me, though. They warned me that I'd be in big trouble if I ever got caught again, or if I ever told anyone. That's why I never mentioned it to Shay. That explains a lot. About what? About you. You always seemed to know how dangerous it was here in the smoke. Somehow you understood what cities were really like even before my parents told you the truth about the operation. You were the only runaway I've ever met who really got it. Hallie nodded. That much was true. I get it. And you still want to go back there for my parents and Shay? To risk getting caught? To risk your mind? A sob broke in her voice. I have to make it up to you. David held her tighter, tried to kiss her, and she had to turn her face away, tears finally coming. Hallie, you are amazing. Our next chapter is called Ruin. They didn't leave the cave until the next morning. Tally squinted in the dawn light, eyes scanning the sky for a fleet of hover cars, suddenly rising above the trees. But they hadn't heard any sound of the search all night. Maybe now that the smoke was destroyed, catching the last few runaways wasn't worth the trouble. David's hoverboard had spent the night hidden in the cave, and hadn't had any sunlight for a whole day now, but it had just enough charge to get them back up the mountain. They rode to the river. Tallie's stomach rumbled after a whole day without food, but the first thing she needed was water. Her mouth was so dry she could hardly talk. David knelt at the bank and dipped his head under the icy water. Tallie shivered at the sight. Without a blanket or shoes, she'd frozen in a cave all night long, even huddled in David's arms. She needed warm food in her before she could face anything colder than a morning breeze. What if the smoke still occupied? She asked. Where will we get food? You said they put prisoners in the rabbit pen? Where'd the rabbits go? All over. Exactly. They should be everywhere by now, and they aren't hard to catch. She grimaced. Well, okay, as long as we cook them. David laughed. Of course. I've never actually started a fire, she admitted. Don't worry, you're a natural. He stepped up onto his board and held out his hand. Riding double was something Tally had never done before, and she found herself glad it was with David and not just anyone. She stood in front of him, bodies touching, her arms out, and his hands around her waist. They negotiated the turns without words, Tally shifting her weight gradually, waiting for David to follow her lead. As they slowly got the hang of it, their bodies began to move together, threading the board down the familiar path as one. It worked, as long as they went slowly, but Tally kept her ears open for sounds of pursuit. If a hover car appeared, a full-speed escape was going to be tricky. They smelled the smoke a long time before they saw it. From high up the mountain, the buildings had looked like a burned-out campfire, smoking and crumbling, blackened through and through. Nothing moved in the compound except a few pieces of paper stirred by the wind. Looks like it burned all night, Tally said. David nodded, speechless. Tally grasped his hand, wondering what it looked like to see your childhood home reduced to a smoking ruin. I'm so sorry, David, she said. We have to go down. I need to see if my parents... He swallowed the words. Tally searched for signs of anyone remaining in the smoke. It seemed entirely deserted, but there might be a few specials in hiding, waiting for stragglers to reappear. We should wait. I can't. My parents' house is on the other side of the ridge. Maybe the specials didn't see it. If they missed it, Maddie and Az will still be there. But what if they ran? Then we'll find them. In the meantime, let's not get ourselves caught. David sighed. All right. Tally held his hand tight. They unfolded the hoverboard and waited as the sun climbed, watching for any sign of a human below. Occasionally, the embers of the fire flared to life in the breeze, and the last standing columns of wood collapsed, one by one, crumbling into ash. A few animals rummaged for food, and Tally watched in silent horror as a stray rabbit was taken by a wolf, the short struggle leaving only a patch of blood and fur. This was what was left of nature, raw and wild, only hours after the smoke had fallen. "Ready to go down?" David asked after an hour. "No," Tally said, "but I never will be." They approached slowly, ready to turn and fly if any specials appeared. But when they reached the edge of town, Tally felt her anxiety turn into something worse, a horrible certainty that no one remained there. Her home was gone, replaced by nothing but charred wreckage. At the rabbit pen, footprints show where groups of Smokies had been moved in and out through the gates, a whole community turned into cattle. A few rabbits still hopped around in the dirt. "Well, at least we won't starve," David said. "I guess not," Tally said, although the sight of the smoke still filled her with hunger. She wondered how David always managed to think of practical thoughts, no matter what horrors were in front of him. "Hey, what's that?" At one corner of the pen, just outside the fence, clusters of little shapes lay on the ground. They edged the board closer, David squinting through the drifting wall of smoke. "It looks like shoes." Tally blinked. He was right. She lowered the board and jumped off, running to the spot. Tally looked around in amazement. Around her were scattered 20 or so pairs of shoes, in all sizes. She fell to her knees to look closer. The laces were still tied, as if the shoes had been kicked off by people whose hands were bound behind them. "Roy recognized me," she murmured. "What?" Tally turned to David. "When I escaped, I flew right over the pen. Roy must have seen me. He knew I didn't have shoes. We joked about it." She imagined the Smokies, helplessly awaiting their fate, making one last gesture of defiance. Croy would have kicked his own shoes off, then whispered, to whomever he could, "Tally's free, and barefoot," and they'd left her with a score of pairs to pick from, the only way they could help the one Smoky they'd seen escape. "They knew I'd come back here." Her voice faltered. What they didn't know was who had betrayed them. She picked a pair that looked about the right size, with grippy soles for hoverboarding, and pulled them on. They fit, even better than the ones the Rangers had given her. Jumping back on the board, Tally had to hide the pained expression on her face. This was what it would be like from now on. Every gesture of kindness from her victims would only make her feel worse. "Okay, let's go." The hover path wound through the smoking camp, over what streets remained beneath the charred ruins. Beside a long building, now little more than a ridge of blackened rubble, David pulled his board to a halt. "I was afraid of this." Tally tried to picture what had stood there. Her knowledge of the smoke had evaporated, the familiar streets reduced to an unrecognizable sprawl of ashes and embers. She saw a few blackened pages fluttering in the wind. The library. "They didn't take the books out before they—" she cried. "But why?" "They don't want people to know what it was like before the operation. They want to keep you hating yourselves. Otherwise, it's too easy to get used to ugly faces. Normal faces." Tally turned around and looked into David's eyes. Some of them, anyways. He smiled sadly. Then a thought crossed her mind. The boss was running away with some old magazines. Maybe he escaped. On foot? David sounded dubious. "I hope so." She leaned and the board slid towards the edge of town. A blotch of pepper still marked the ground where she had fought the special. Tally jumped off, trying to remember exactly where the boss had escaped into the forest. "If he got away, he must be long gone," David said. Tally pushed her way into the brush, looking for signs of a struggle. The morning sun was streaming through the leaves, and a trail of broken bushes cut into the forest. The boss had been none too graceful, leaving a path like a charging elephant. She found the duffel bag half hidden, shoved under a moss-covered fallen tree. Zipping it open, Tally saw that the magazines were still there, each one lovingly wrapped in its own plastic cover. She slung the bag over her shoulder, glad to have salvaged something from the library, a small victory over Dr. Cable. A moment later, she found the boss. He lay on his back, his head turned at an angle that Tally instantly knew was utterly wrong. His fingers were clenched, the nails bloody from clawing at someone. He must have fought to distract them, or maybe to keep them from finding the duffel bag, or maybe, for Tally's sake, having seen that she'd reached the forest too. She remembered what the specials had said to her more than once. "We don't want to hurt you, but we will if we have to." They had been serious. They always were. She stumbled back out of the forest, stunned, the bag still hanging from her shoulder. You found something? David asked. She didn't answer. He saw the expression on her face and jumped down from the board. What happened? They caught him. They killed him. David looked at her, his mouth opened. He took a slow breath. Come on, Tally. We have to go. She blinked. The sunlight seemed wrong, twisted out of shape like the boss's neck. And if the world had become horribly distorted, as if the world had become horribly distorted while she was among the trees. Where? She murmured. We have to go to my parents' house. All right, tune in tomorrow to see what happened with his parents. Thanks. Bye.